G'day, friends and fans. Pardon me. Welcome to Dave Talk Stuff. The Ukraine war continues, and the war of words, of course, pardon me, is heating up. We don't have any news on a alleged meeting that was to take place, or we do know that Zelensky turned down not one, but two offers to travel to Moscow to settle the Ukraine war. Zelensky, of course, comes out with this extraordinary claim that Putin is stalling and refuses talks, and the West cheer like trained seals. How can anybody take Zelensky seriously, or any Western leader seriously, with bold claims like that? You're playing right into Russian propaganda. Everybody beating their chest, demanding Putin bow to Zelensky is pointless. It's grandstanding. It's playing to the crowd. And it's only going to make things worse. And the people of Ukraine pay the price for the... And who's cheering on the Ukraine war? The left. Have you seen what they've been up to lately? You really want them in charge of foreign policy? You want them dictating the terms of Ukraine's war? Ukraine is suffering, not just economically and politically, but this war is a desperate move by Zelensky to stay in office. And if people can't see that, then God have mercy on your soul. If you really think that this started with Russia's invasion of 2022, you haven't been paying attention. I'm trying to bring you the unbiased news, as fair and and give you an idea of why the Russians are fighting, so that it can be unraveled. The lies, if you unscramble the lies of this war and just bring it down to, it comes down to a simple fundamental fact. And Charlie Kirk pointed this out. When nations stop talking, they start fighting. Ukraine was promising peace to Ukraine, but they weren't talking to Russia. They weren't honouring their agreements. Ukraine wasn't our ally. They were China's ally. I'll get to that later. First, a quick roundup of the news. Everything was a mistake, according to Poland. Sorry, wasn't a mistake, according to Poland. The focus is trying to drag US into a war with Ukraine. And as good old George Soros says, we always find the way. We never ask what happens if people don't go along with your plans. We find the way. We find the way. This war is between George Soros and civilization. And if you cannot see that, God have mercy on your soul. And I'll have to sit here for tens of hours going through video after video after video, going through the Open Society Foundation, the coup, the Maidan coup, the NGOs behind Zelensky, Zelensky's betrayal of some of his allies, siding with the secret police, the SBU. Now, there are key events, most of which are just merely propaganda. We do know that Ukraine has a lot of anti-aircraft guns being shipped in recently from Poland, and they have taken out drones. That's undisputed. Both sides have fired drones at each other. Both sides have taken down drones. There was a massive attack, which seems to have resulted in net nothing, but we'll get to that later. But most of the news today is about regional security, and of course, the usual dolts and dullards from Europe have nothing to offer. Okay? Zelensky's pushing for tougher responses to Russia on Russia from Poland and all in the West. He refuses to budge, and yet people keep bleating about Putin. And most of the people doing the bleating are not going to do the bleeding. They're not going to fight. They're not going to send their children to fight. However, France has sent more fighters to help Poland, apparently. This is all grandstanding, of course. They're all beating their chest, talking about more military aid while their countries languish in economic mayhem and ruin. Now, the odd part is, as these countries decline, the amount of Chinese imports grow, the amount of Chinese investment grows, and these countries are eventually going to be swallowed by Saudi Arabia, a consortium of Saudi Arabia, China, and BlackRock. Europe is going to be a vassal of China because of its idiotic descent into war, ironically giving all the power to Putin. In the end, they're going to bite off their nose to spite the face and say, "Oh, we defeated Putin." That's all it is, so they can outlast Putin, hoping he dies in office or gets murdered. Because Zelensky's much younger than him. That's all this is about, is keeping Zelensky in power so they can beat their chest. Because Zelensky and Putin are both alumni of the WEF. However, Putin left the WEF in 2022. Oh, doesn't that start to make sense now? But people forget, China was the one who promised security. China was the one who made guarantees to Ukraine. And then China backed Russia's war after betrayal by Ukraine. The betrayal of Ukraine, of course, was the coup against the elected leader. It was Xi Jinping who stood with Vladimir Putin last week and called for, what do they say? Treatment. All nations should be treated as equals and avoid homogenization and power politics. And that Xi has offered a no-limits alliance with Putin and increased the amount of sales of raw materials to Russia and being paid for with oil. However, it was 2013, before the coup, Ukraine and China signed a treaty. Security guarantees and territorial integrity. As Peter Gallard points out, China has betrayed both Russia and China. China's betrayed both Russia and Ukraine. It's China. China was dissatisfied with the pro-Russian government. NGOs received huge influxes of foreign money. Zelensky was funded through Soros NGOs to create this servant of the people. Everything was being put in place. After the coup, there were attacks on Russian civilians, on Russian-speaking people. Chinese were moving in and taking over businesses. But because it was so convoluted a plan, when a plan has too many moving parts, it unravels to the point where Zelensky has no control over Ukraine. Russia has barely control over Russia, and foreign influences are all lining up to stick Russia with knives because it gets them view counts. Nobody cares about the truth anymore. Everything's about the algorithm, the view counts, getting the likes, getting the clicks, getting the ad revenue, get videos out the door, and the truth be damned. And the people who have the people who have the power to fight this are you. You have to make other people famous, such as myself. You have to give up all the influencers from TikTok. They're all paid liars and actors. Harry Sisson, many are paid by the DNC. There's not just China and Russia pumping out disinformation on TikTok every day. A lot of it's DNC. But until people give up on the liars and the paid actors, Hollywood be damned. The reality on the ground has to be addressed. We could... Russia's fighting north of Sumy. They haven't they expanded the exclusion zone there. They haven't expanded on the exclusion zone here. They've now, according to some, the Ukrainians are contained here with nowhere to go, and they're just quietly hiding out from the rest, waiting out the war. Now, this expanded recently, but it has been fighting since, and fighting in new areas. But Kupiansk is a stall. North alignment, Russians got on the offensive. They've taken new territory. However, north of Seversk has seen nothing. Most of the front north between over. Geez, what is that? 300 miles of territory without conflict. Most of the front is quiet today. However, there was some bombings and artillery. Long-range rocketry on and drones, of course, on Zuruzba and Druzhka. There was some Russian advances, most of which are not reflected on this map. However, apparently they've taken control of this area. And they're fighting north of this town here, in this town here. They're fighting north of one town in another. Apparently, they're further up this road. They're fighting outside. They haven't done anything, though. Okay, most of the fighting is in this area, where there has been some territorial gains, but Ukrainians are coming in on the flanks. Russia's, of course, fighting in Novokhlumensky and on the road into Khmelnytsky. Of course, the map hasn't upgraded, but the Ukrainians, of course, have been pushed back here, and Russia's made some gains here south of Pavlovsk. They, however, haven't made gains into Pavlovsk or even tried. They're fighting outside of Pavlovsk. There's renewed offensives here, though very little gains, but they have taken a town here. Now, there's various towns on the map that seem to have the same name. I don't know if this is deliberate or a mistake, but this isn't the town that's been reported. The town's been reported as a different name by both Russians. They're actually reporting this town here taken by Russians, not this town. Although reporting of another name, although I can't seem to find it, but it could also be that the Russians used the Ukrainian name because Russians talking about taking this town, not this town. It could just be a simple mistake and the Russians using the Ukrainian name and not the separate name given on the map to the settlement, because they have it as one. All right, so various doesn't make sense, I know, but Ukraine's maps don't make sense. They have some towns with the same name all over the place, which I think is a deliberate wartime misleading. It's childish, okay? Russia's got maps, okay? They don't need your maps at all. Now, according to news from the United States, repeated by Russia, and Steve Gill noted that Vladimir Zelensky's unwillingness to abandon his maximalist demands are a hindrance. His ongoing demands that Putin has to resign, Putin has to pay compensation, and that Putin has to withdraw from every inch of Ukraine. And basically, there's no guarantees of safety for any Russian-speaking person in Ukraine. However, only the support for the Ukraine war has declined. Support for sending troops. France has turned. The majority of French people, say about 53%, are against any Western military contingent to Ukraine. They basically believe it's not their problem. 75%, however, claim that they're in favour of security guarantees, but they can't define what it is. And when asked that it includes arms and support, that support drops. And when they say, it's only a small sample, but still, most samples polls tend to be reliable these days. They tend to know what they're doing rather than spreading propaganda. The French are really driven by the polls, and they really panic over the polls. Same with the UK. Look at the amount of aid, for 142 million. That's way down from the billions they were sending last month. Ukraine, of course, UK is running out of cash. They're going broke. Most of them sent on a one-way trip to Ukraine. It's what happens when you're obsessed with printing money. Okay? That your obsession with printing money. They want to create this artificial fiat currency and basically have you enslaved in government-owned industry. They want to collapse industry in the UK and basically have you indebted for life. Servants of the state. That's why Ukraine's political party is servants of the state. Now, Ukraine, according to the EU Observer, has the worst birth-to-death ratio of any European country, which includes Russia. Ukraine has a demographic collapse. They've lost huge population since the 1990s. But they keep pumping out the same information. Yet there's entire swaths of Ukraine which are basically just old women. No teenagers, no young adults. Women have sold themselves into sexual slavery throughout Europe and have died by age 26 of various diseases or suicide. It's a common problem that is growing. There was a huge scandal in the 90s about the sex trafficking in Ukraine. But by the time Zelensky comes to office, it's all swept under the rug. It was a bigger scandal than Epstein. But Ukraine swept everything under the rug. Of course, Ukraine's economy is dead. That even if a truce was declared or achieved, how are you going to get people back to Ukraine? It's going to be mass migration, of which Ukraine's lost over 7 million, mostly women and children. Eurostat recommends that only 4.3 million Ukrainians are in the EU. Where's the rest of the 7 million? Russia. Most Ukrainians have left for Russia. Ukraine has lost several generations, and they're soon running out of young people, according to Ukraine's own opposition group. Ukraine has been depopulation. It's a genocide. And that Zelensky's administration is determined to hold on to power at any cost, which includes the death of Ukraine. And the left don't care because the left think that that it doesn't matter if it's who lives there. Okay? The left don't care about native rights. They don't care about white people at all. They just say, we'll just flood it with other people. They can call themselves Ukrainians. See, they think national identity is just a claim, an identity that you just a label you put on yourself. That everything's just a human construct. They have no concept of nature, biology, or anything like that. They don't believe in science. They believe in politics. And unfortunately, 43% of the world are in love with power. And 50% of the world is in love with silence, just wanting to be left alone. And unfortunately, that leaves a very few outspoken people who struggle to reach an audience, while the glib, the cliched, the beautiful people lullaby you into a false sense of they fill you with information, but they lead you down the garden path of inaction. Russian forces have liberated a town, according to Russia. Now, this is, I think, the second or third time we've covered this town. It has changed hands several times. But this time, Ukraine lost a lot of soldiers this week. Twice as many as last week. And again, as I said, Russia's taken a town, but not the one but on the map it's marked differently. And again, there was huge losses at that town individually. Now, for most people who may or may not know, okay, Russia is laying claim to and has almost all of Lugansk and most of Donetsk. They are offering a freeze on the battle. They will not advance in Zaporozhye or Kherson. Here in the north, they'll withdraw from all positions back to the 2022 borders. Here, probably as well, which is probably why they don't want Kupiansk, but merely use it to pin down Ukrainian troops. This is a buffer zone. What they want is a DMZ, but they also want all of this, which is the major sticking point, because apparently this industrial hub is 20% of Ukraine's GDP, which is gone, by the way. Most of this industrial hub is ruined. Zelensky's maximalist absolute demands are backed by Europe. So Europe is in the way. Trump tried to negotiate a deal, and he gets met with contempt from everybody, including Giorgia Meloni, who, by the way, has made deals with Xi in the past. So has Zelensky, apparently. Remember that Zelensky was buying arms and munitions from Xi last year through India. India is another one who's profiting off this war. So is China. Now, Putin's wartime economy has actually dragged down the Russian economy. Without the war, Russian economy would be growing around 5.5%. Without the war, according to experts. Everybody, US trade representatives, everybody believes that Russia could if Russia had a larger population, they would overtake China. That's a fact. If Europe and Russia got together, they would overtake China. They wouldn't need all these migrants. They'd get rid of them. Get rid of them now. All the criminal, because half of them are criminals, according to some studies. Which again is why China and India are both pushing for this war, so that Russia is permanently isolated. If Russia and Europe got together, there would be no occupation by the United States. See, Zelensky, however, hates the idea of Ukraine not being the center of the universe. He has offered to turn... This is not a hatred of Jews. It's just a fact that he has offered to take in millions of Jews displaced in the Middle East into. He wants to turn Ukraine into a non-Christian country. Now, many Jews have rejected his offer and instead taken settlement in the United States. Zelensky's losing power and influence within the Jewish world, within the sphere of support that he originally had. His own people from Ukraine have gone to Canada and won't come back. His wife won't leave Paris. She goes shopping in New York. You know. Now, how many world... could you imagine if Zelensky wasn't the darling of Europe? They would be pointing out how corrupt he is right now. Questioning how he earns $348,000 a year when the country's average wage is 5,600 Ukrainian pesos a month, like $56 a month. Funded by the US taxpayer, or was funded by the US taxpayer. It's now funded by Europe. And they won't be able to fund it beyond next year. They're gone. Europe's gone. They're also trying to cling to power. Nobody seems to want to notice until it's too late. Everybody's just sitting back hoping, if we leave this problem alone, it'll solve itself like every other crisis. Oh, there'll be just another crisis. We solved this one now. People are giving up. And when you give up, look what happens. Now, I'm not going to bang on about Charlie Kirk forever, but I do think he was right. When nations stop talking, they start fighting. And this started with Ukraine. Okay? This war started with Ukraine, started with China and India plotting in Ukraine. It started with various Ukrainian nationalists plotting to get rid of Russians. It started with the business organizations plotting to break up Russia. It started with Europe posturing because they've ruined their own economies. Failing to invest in technologies to recycle materials to improve the efficiency of power until it's too late. Everybody's doing things too late because they rather buy votes with the welfare state. So many French take early retirement. That should have been banned long ago. But that's how the socialists have stayed in power for so long. They keep buying people's vote with early retirement. Same with England. Blair, Brown. People forget. Labour and the lies about the weapons of mass destruction started with the British Labour government. They all pinned it on Bush. Yeah, he was an idiot for believing them, but that's the reality. Oh, we should have known better. But you trust the British still, today, the left. The Democrats, they just go back to trusting the British. The very people who lied about the weapons of mass destruction. Created this whole Ukraine and was it Ukraine, sturdy bombs and uranium from Africa and all these other paranoid delusional conspiracies. Ukraine was talked into giving up its nuclear weapons by China in return for security guarantees. Ukraine is another ally. The Europeans are just swooping in, trying to flex muscle, trying to swoop up whatever labour force they can drain out of Ukraine. But their labour force that they're draining are going just to pad their public service, to give themselves institutionalised voters. They're not actually productive citizens. They're dragging the European economy down. Once you start to realise and unravel this war and look at and everybody keeps talking about American wages. Since Trump, American wages have gone from 55% to 60%. That's a huge growth. You compare that to the rest of the world. The average wage ratio, the wages across the United States are much higher. So wages being 60% of the cost of production. In Ukraine, it's 5%. See the difference? In China, China's the worst. You can't have poor people and rich nations. Okay, the nation that eventually dies, the local economy collapses. Ukraine has relied on export since, 1930 or something. But Ukrainian nationalists are supporting are cheering their independent fight for liberation in the 1930s against the Russians. They're rewriting history. They weren't liberating. They were German invaders on their way to Russia. You were just in the way. They're making Ukrainians who fought for Nazi Germany, and their descendants of. That's their descendants. That's who rules Ukraine now. So the left have embraced the fascist while calling you a fascist. You just can't. Fiction is truth is stranger than fiction. Again, unless you can elevate voices of truth, the lies are going to take over. That's how Orwell warned you. The party will just basically keep marching on, believing that it's always right, and its sycophants don't care because it's a job. They have a job for life within their little ministries of truth or love or the ministry of war. Peace, you know. So as they are happy in their Hollywood bubble, they don't care what happens to the rest of us. You see, it's the I'm all right, everything's all right attitude. And that's the problem with the 50% of leave me alone. They're not all good people. They're selfish. Charlie Kirk gets killed, they don't even care. Oh, somebody will take his place. And then all the conspiracy theorists come out with absolute nothing to base their conspiracies on. Ukraine, at least we have a tangible timeline of events, most of which aren't getting reported. So please, like, share and subscribe. Get the truth out there. And please, there's going to be no ad revenue, okay? The adpocalypse that is coming is going to be worse. Alright, the vast majority of people, if you don't get to 500, if I can't get to 500 by the end of the year, I may be off YouTube. I barely got my channel back. I barely started uploading videos. And now I have to worry about this new coming apocalypse as YouTube looks to cut costs. Even though they're making $1 billion profit. But that most of that is just money from Google. It's not actual new money. That's the problem. Google isn't making new money. It's just taking money from its advertisers and pumping it into its subsidiaries to keep them running. Google is eventually going to run out of contracts. People are going to stop sooner or later. People are going to get sick of Google's monopoly, particularly on YouTube. Right now, most people allegedly watch YouTube, but after the collapse of robots and bot viewing, 20%, social media dropped by 22%. And all of a sudden, they're not reporting the statistics anymore on views. They're going to, a lot of channels are going to they're going to turn off view counts next. They're already turning off dislikes. Soon they're going to turn off the hidden dislikes. Soon they're going to hide view counts. They're going to make channels fight. Or there's even talk now of making channels, audition. Basically giving you a year. If you can't get the 500 viewers, you're out. They're turning everything into a mad dash, a mad competition, which is going to create huge creative turnover. And eventually, people are going to give up and stop trying. And a handful will make all the money. And then you'll complain that, and then it'll be just like the media landscape of the, everybody, it'll just become the legacy media all over again. The oligarchs will be the only ones with view counts because they can buy them, because they can game the system. So thank you for your support. I really need it. All my links are in the link tree, description below, or in my profile. Or you can scan the QR code on the screen. Please support the channel just with a like. Just get that view count up. Just get that subscribe. Costs you nothing. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.